Law requires delinquent gravesite fees to be paid by the deceased party's closest living relative, which meant me. Eugene wasn't family. Yeah, I was the closest living person relative to his body at time of death. I'm the one who found him, you see, so I pay the fines. Suicide's a crime. The legal term is irreparable damage to company property. What Eugene did to himself was vandalism.
Ha ha, ha ha, ha ha, ha ha.
Why am I even here? I could be whetting my appetite for what the real developers of BGS games will have in store for us years from now. Or hell, I could be undergoing the most important quest of shagging all the bears. But no, I'm here trudging through what was supposed to be the weapon that would slay a god, but only really ended up with the legacy of being confused for the true masterpiece of the stars. But the question remains, why am I doing this? Because a certain cobbler encouraged me to finally lash out against the fetishists of a relic of a bygone age, and I have a duty to stand by my convictions. So, let's use my month's payment for Game Pass to play through The Outer Worlds to see if it truly did make Bethesda Softworks irrelevant. Set in the year 2355, in an alternate timeline where Teddy Roosevelt never broke up the big business trusts, you are a passenger trapped in cryosleep aboard the Hope, a colony ship floating around the colonized solar system, Halcyon. The game starts when a Dr. Phineas Wells boards the Hope and collects your pod before bolting from the local authorities. Once you're unfrozen, the Doctor tasks you in helping him fight against the Board, the conglomerate of corporations that run the entire system. From there, it's up to you to decide to side or fight against the corporations in whatever way you want. The best way I could describe the Outer Worlds is Diet Firefly Fallout trying to be Borderlands. You can see it in the retro-futuristic aesthetic, the plucky crew you amass on an unreliable spaceship literally called the Unreliable, and leaning heavily into corporate satire with dark humor. On paper, this should work, but in practice, it ends up being a pale imitation of each of its inspirations. How? Well, I need to lay down the rest of the game's elements to explain it. As it was advertised, The Outer Worlds is a first-person action RPG like the Bethesda-era Fallout games, only set in space. At the start of the game, you choose your starting attributes which are permanent, select an initial boost to your stats, select an aptitude which amounts to an insignificant trait or minuscule stat boost, and customize your appearance. Once you're free, you do the typical open-world RPG activities. You explore open areas, talk to characters, engage in combat, level up skills, and make choices that affect the outcome of the story. Instead of a large open world, the Outer Worlds is split up into smaller open areas on planets and space stations you travel to via your ship. For exploration and combat, you can walk, sprint, sneak, use healing items, dodge in midair, lockpick doors and containers, hack terminals, swing and block with melee weapons, and aim and shoot with guns. The combat and movement are reminiscent of Fallout 4's combat while feeling slightly more responsive, but not by much. Instead of VATS to target enemy limbs, the Outer Worlds instead uses a slow motion ability called Tactical Time Dilation, TDD, that drains over time and when you use your weapon. When you level up, you gain 10 skill points to dump into stats. What's interesting is that you could put your points into categories first to level up all the skills at the same time, then once each of the skills surpasses 50, you level them up individually from then on. Every 2 levels, you gain a perk point to put into perks that are separated into 3 tiers. Every 5 perk points put into any tier, a new tier opens up. Though an odd feature included in the game is flaws. At random points of the game, like taking constant damage from a specific element, you'll be given the option to receive a negative trait in exchange for an extra perk point. And since I always like being a jack of all trades, I never took one, and I imagine the majority of players never took any of them either. Inventory is the standard sorting of weapons, apparel, consumables, mods, junk, and quest items, with weight being the limiting factor. Weapons and armor have their unique levels, stats, mod slots, and armor ratings, and you can disassemble any of them for weapon and armor parts to repair other items. With your science skill, you can tinker with them to increase their level at the expense of increasingly more expensive payments of currency. As this is an RPG, you'll have a crew of companions you can recruit. You could bring 2 along with you at a time, and each will give you unique stat boosts. Every 5 levels, you can level them up with a perk. Lastly, with a high enough leadership skill, you can command them to perform a special move in combat. With everything summed up, it's best to describe my playthrough to convey what I did and didn't like. For my build, I invested heavily into handguns, and my best friend became the boulder pistol that ended up disintegrating nearly everything that crossed me. The other skills I primarily invested in were science to tinker with my equipment to the fullest, and the rest being lockpicking and persuasion, which my primary companions Pavarti and Felix brought to the max out in the field. As stated, the combat is similar to that of the Fallout games. Moderately intelligent enemies that either go down very easily or tank your attacks while putting you down in mere seconds, depending on if you're over or under leveled. But I will admit I really liked a little feature of the TDD. You can see what you'll do to your enemy based on what body part you're aiming at. What I ended up doing was enter TDD with my revolver, aim it at a powerful enemy's chest and knock them down, and then use my bolt pistol to finish them off. And, yeah, that's practically all I really liked about the Outer Worlds, because everything else about the game is shallow. The premise is shallow, the aesthetic is shallow, the locations are shallow, the gameplay is shallow, the characters are shallow, the quests are shallow, the factions are shallow, the story is shallow. Hell! The length is shallow. Let's go down the list. As I said, the combat is basically slightly better Fallout 4, but the problem is the enemy variety is lacking. We have marauders, corporate guards, robots, and groups of monsters that are not nearly as memorable as the wildlife you come across in a Fallout game. So many times, combat felt trivial and just something to get done with to move along. Now, I can't fully comment on the stealth aspect of the game since I didn't build my character around it, but I can comment on one aspect that I found odd. The holographic shroud ripped directly from the Total Recall remake. You find an ID cartridge of a corporate trooper, and when you enter a restricted area, you and your companions are automatically disguised for a limited time. To refill your energy, all you have to do is step outside the area to instantaneously refill it, or if you run out in the restricted area, you could pass a relatively generous speech check for the same outcome. What irks me about this is that you acquire it regardless of stats. To me, this feels like a band-aid solution to a problem Obsidian had in developing convincing infiltration areas where stealth would benefit from it. Would have been a golden opportunity to bring back the faction clothing from New Vegas. Another note is that companions felt like tissue paper, always dying mere seconds into a fight. Though that's mostly because I neglected to level up my leadership stats or paid attention to their gear. I only kept them around for their stat buffs. And a few last gripes. No pickpocketing or hand grenades? Really? For the majority of your playthrough, you'll be taking quests in backwater outposts. The problem is they all feel the same even though each one is supposed to be on different planets. Backwater towns on small barren maps with so many closed off colonist huts and littered with dreadful amounts of monsters. And those small maps are a problem because they lack the, "Ooh, what's over there?" feeling Bethesda games are known for. You will eventually have a change of scenery when you go to the Groundbreaker, an asteroid, and Byzantium, but your time at each is fleeting before you can soak them in. And the other reason the locations are shallow is because Obsidian definitely went for the Fallout in space retrofuturistic feeling, and it might have worked. But what undoes it all was what really turned me off the first time I saw the trailer. The drab coat of orange painted over everything. This sick feeling color palette was the largest reason the environments blended into one another and prevented me from enjoying the sights. Now you might say, that's not a fair criticism because of Fallout 3's unhealthy shade of green. But the thing is, Bethesda's, "Ooh, what's over there?" talent mitigated the effects of the color palette by making what you found interesting. Here, the smaller maps, the repetitive enemies, and the sick shade of orange made everything feel like a slog. When you talk to the characters for quests, you're treated to the familiar close-up on the characters' faces that's been present in every Bethesda or Bethesda-themed game since 2006. The facial animations are slightly better than the creation engine jank we've been exposed to, and it's nice to see your companions chime in once in a while. Though I think Fallout 4 had the better idea of changing the camera angle to mimic Mass Effect's camera shifts. However, it's what the characters say that's shallow. Companions first. At first, your companions seem to have the potential of being interesting, but after I finished each of their personal quests, none of them ended up feeling lovable or memorable, with the very tiny exception of Pavarti. Every single companion of Fallout New Vegas, and even Fallout 4, was memorable. Even the most hated one. Guess it supports the saying, better to be hated than forgotten. As for the NPCs, they have the same problem as your companions. Potential to be interesting, but never passing that threshold to be memorable. So once again, I just talk to the quest givers, roll my eyes at their attempts at humor, get the quest, finish it, then return to get my reward. Repeat, repeat, repeat. And speaking of which, the quests are the standard been there done that you've already seen in the Fallout games. In fact, there's a quest that I'm convinced is outright plagiarism.
I'm afraid we don't get many visitors out here. The Raptidons and Marauders scare off all but the boldest. And if you've braved them, you must be exhausted. Why don't you stay for dinner?
I'm disappointed in you, stranger, so quick to judge us. Did you ever stop to think that I have a family to support here? Judge not, lest ye be judged, as the good book says. Honestly, how many people have you killed? The only difference between us is that I'm bringing home the bacon for my family.
Are you sure we can call these groups factions? Because they are so underutilized. All I really did was complete quests for them like I do in any other RPG, increasing their reputation, only to completely forget they existed until they suddenly appeared out of nowhere during the final mission. They are that forgettable. According to How Long to Beat, The Outer Worlds' main story can be finished in about 13 hours, with the extras extending it to 26. This is a big problem. Because of the short length, the world, the companions, and the factions don't get the development they need to leave a lasting impression. Though I guess this could be considered a blessing because I was able to be done with this game much faster. So, what is the theme of The Outer Worlds? Besides, corporations are incompetent and bad. You see, The Outer Worlds doesn't really have an overarching theme behind the anti-corporate message. To explain this, let me give you examples of games who do have meaningful themes. BioShock was clear in saying that John Stossel's vision of a governmentless utopia is nothing more than a pipe dream that's destined to sink to the bottom of the sea. But it also delved into the mind-twisting concepts of free will, player agency, and practically coining the term ludonarrative dissonance. Deus Ex was firm in its anti-corporate message, being the grandfather of cyberpunk video games essentially. But it also asked profound questions about the role of technology, transhumanism, godhood, and being the prophet of the future we may inevitably reach within our lifetimes.
You will soon have your God, and you will make it with your own hands.
Hell, even Cyberpunk 2077 had something more than just corporations are bad in the background. Throughout the game, you feel the oppression of Night City breathing down on you as you are struggling to survive the nightmare that you brought on yourself by trying to be a legend. Sure, its themes aren't as deep as Deus Ex as many critics said, but I found something meaningful when I played this game earlier this year. Even with everything so bleak and there being no true happy ending, I found a shred of hope for my Nomad character. Her journey came full circle as she joined Pan Am and her clan to leave Night City behind to live the rest of her days with her new family. The Outer Worlds, on the other hand, doesn't have any of that. All it has is a standard good versus evil plot with pathetic attempts to paint shades of gray over some of its shallow quests. Let's look at Edgewater for example. It's set up like a good and evil scenario where you need to choose between the corpos or the deserters for who gets their power. As the quest went on, it felt like the writers realized that this conflict was too black and white, so they sporadically painted a shade of gray over it by having Parvati tell you that siding with the deserters wouldn't be good at the last minute. How? Because the deserters' leader, Adelaide, who offers you food, supplies, and shelter when you first arrive, is actually prejudiced against the corporate residents and won't help them. What? This attempt to paint gray over this conflict is pathetic. Even more mind-boggling is that the supposed right choice is to give the power back to the town, but then convince the town mayor to step down and let Adelaide take control instead. How is the player supposed to know that this was an option if it was never mentioned up until that point? Not that it matters, because the rest of the game feels like that. Good and evil, with pathetic attempts to paint gray over some of these conflicts. So, you just go through the motions of completing quests and killing enemies until you get to the end. If you decide to side with Welves, you'll be captured by the board and you'll be forced to raid the prison he's being held at. What follows is a pathetic imitation of the Second Battle of Hoover Dam, where the factions you've completely forgotten about appear unannounced and help you fight. Then once you get to the end, you're confronted by the head of the board, who once again is a pathetic imitation of another iconic video game staple.
In any other circumstance, I'd admire your boldness. In this one, however, I have only 2 words for you. Fuck off.
I will pay you to kill yourself. I've got a perfect spot all picked out for you. And you don't want to? That's fine. Call the Hyperion Suicide Prevention Hotline and you'll get nothing. But if you want a huge reward, you jump off that cliff and become my bitch. Take your time.
After you defeat his robot, the chairman goes down like the bitch that he is, and Wells is free. And once again, another pathetic imitation. This time, the goddamn slideshow ripped straight from New Vegas. The major problem being the game is so short and all the characters and factions are underdeveloped that this last-ditch effort to develop them at the very end of the game is once again pathetic. In the end, The Outer Worlds is all but forgotten from the gaming discourse despite initially being lauded. Why? The same reason many of us forced ourselves to like The Force Awakens when it came out. It was something the fans wanted either out of starvation and or hatred of the previous iteration, only to look back years later to see how naive and short-sighted they were. And the ironic thing is, it seems the tables have turned all these years later. But getting back on track, I'll ask the question again. Why did I play this, knowing full well I wasn't going to enjoy it? Because it was necessary to absolve myself of the last of the fanboys' poison, and to be qualified for the valid comparisons that will be made when the time comes. And now that it's over, I can confidently say this. I will never play this game ever again. Perhaps the DLCs are much better than the base game, but I have no interest in paying any more money than I already have for this game. With that said, The Outer Worlds gets my expected rating of...
Not great, not terrible.
Perhaps this is a lesson that Obsidian is better suited for their smaller budget passion projects. And who knows, maybe Avowed and The Outer Worlds 2 can be masterpieces if the example of Tango Gameworks creating something special from a mess of a first outing is anything to go by. But frankly, I'm not going to stick around to see if they do. I have a flight to catch after all. For now, thanks for watching, and don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe. See you next time.